Zachy the Sun is your host on this most epic journey through pop culture's past. Hold on to your butts. This is Nostalgia Theater.
Brought to you by the Movie Film Podcast.
Hi everyone, this is Zachy. Welcome back to Nostalgia Theater. There are few actors for whom the term TV icon is readily applicable, but I think it definitely applies to my guest for this episode. I'm talking about Patrick Duffy, who's been on our screens consistently for the past 40 years through starring roles on dramas and sitcoms. His most iconic role is as Bobby Ewing, the good son on the legendary series Dallas, which anyone listening knows what a big fan I am of. In fact, 2 months ago marked 30 years since his key role in the most famous on-screen shower scene since Janet Leigh in Psycho. Here to talk about Dallas, The Man from Atlantis, and much more is one of my heroes, the great Patrick Duffy. Thank you so much, Mr. Duffy, for joining us here.
My pleasure, Zachy. I'm not sure I deserve the intro, but I appreciate it very much.
Just to start things out, I'm tempted to jump right into Dallas, but I want to talk a little bit about what got you into acting, what bit you in that direction.
Well, I was saying I started as a lot of people do, I think, get interested in theater or acting in school, doing school plays just, for the fun of it. In junior high school and high school, and I was going to be an architect, and started the preliminary enrollment in the University of Washington School of Architecture when my high school drama teacher, when I was a senior, said to me, I think if you wanted to, you might be able to eke out a living doing this, and I'd be willing to write a letter of recommendation.
Wow.
So I completely switched. Literally overnight, I decided, I'll do that because I was having so much fun. She wrote a letter to a very prestigious special program at the University of Washington. I went home and told my parents I'm not going to be an architect, I'm going to be an actor, and they went, oh, okay. And, I expected a little more resistance, but they were fine with it. I went to a special program at the University of Washington for 4 years. And it was just sort of natural. It felt, every step of the way felt like the way it was supposed to be. And then, following the same path, eventually started landing work, and the career just sort of took care of itself.
Well, and your first regular gig was Man from Atlantis.
Yes, I did a few little things. You always have to go through your trial, which is to get a SAG card, the union card, get a few little jobs, try and get recognition. I didn't get much recognition. I did one thing that I was so proud of, which was a PBS special with Julie Harris called The Last of Mrs. Lincoln. Okay. And then I went back to being a carpenter, and eventually got The Man from Atlantis through multiple auditions and screen tests. And once I did that, once The Man from Atlantis got on the air, I was on the air consistently for 24 years with only 3 weeks of being unemployed.
Wow, not a bad record for a working actor.
No, it was a very, I marvel at that. It was a lot of wonderful circumstances where one job just led to another. But literally, it was only 3 separate jobs that lasted 24 years.
That's astonishing. Well, I mean, and talking about Man from Atlantis, now,
Mm-hmm.
you were in your 20s, I think, when you did the show.
Yes, I was, yes.
And so it's funny because when we look at that show now, it's almost, it wouldn't be out of place now with all of the fantasy and superhero stuff, and it feels like that was a progenitor to that whole genre to some extent. Did you have a fondness for sci-fi and fantasy, or did you have trouble wrapping your brain around it?
I had a fondness for employment is what I had. I would have taken any job. But what did happen, which was interesting, is we did start simultaneously to a couple of other shows on the air, $6 Million Man and The Incredible Hulk. Were all in that same couple of year period. But my show especially was so special effects derivative, and special effects were so primitive at that time that when I look at it now, and I have gone back over the years and looked at a couple of episodes and the pilot, and you get very proud of what you were able to do with so little when you consider what the sort of computer generation of capabilities are these days.
Yeah.
A deep ocean storm carries a strange being to shore, and he nears a death that medical science cannot stop, until a marine scientist returns him to the ocean and makes him live. Where is he from? The computer guesses. He is named Mark Harris and put through a series of tests to calculate his speed, agility, and strength. To return to his ocean existence, Mark decides to help us further our exploration of the oceans and wants to gain knowledge about his human friends.
I have not learned enough.
And I always had a fondness for that character and that relationship. I think we lost the way a bit as it went from movies to series.
Yeah.
But oddly enough, as things do tend to come full circle, last June, I released the first volume of Man from Atlantis book that I have written, 2 more volumes to come, and it's now out on Amazon. But it's an interesting thing. I went back and wrote what I felt the story of the actual Man from Atlantis should be, as opposed to the television eventuality of how they treated the subject. So, it's only been, 40-some years, and I've gone back to square one.
Well, and that's really interesting to me. I mean, is that something that you had been kind of nursing the idea all these years, or it just? I mean, I think, like you said, that the passage of years is something where it makes me wonder. Like, is this something you would have contributed back then had the show gone a little bit longer?
I think, first of all, I never presume that I know what's going to be successful in terms of television. I think had I succeeded, let's put it that way, in getting my idea across, it might not have sold as well as the sort of comic book version that we did for that time period may have been, the correct route to take.
Yeah.
But I always felt that we didn't flesh out the true genesis of the character of Mark Harris.
Yeah.
I always felt that. And then later on, I looked into buying the rights, and I couldn't get the rights to the television show or anything, but I found that I could buy the book rights. So I did. And I held them forever before I ever decided to start writing. So about, 15 years ago, I was up here where I live now in Oregon and had time on my hands. And I sat down and literally in about a month and a half, I wrote this book. Then I didn't do anything with it. I just felt, okay, I did that. And over the years, with the encouragement of Suzanne and Suzanne Summers and some other people, I started talking about it, and finally an agent became interested, and they found a publisher. And, I had to update it because the technology has improved in 15 years.
Right.
I rewrote all the technical things, submitted it, and it got published. And I feel very good about it. The volume that I finished, it's one of 3, but it stands on its own in case the sales don't indicate that it's worthy of 2 more volumes. The first one has a beginning, middle, and end that stands on its own. So I feel like I did the right thing.
Sure.
And I accomplished what I wanted to accomplish. The next 2 volumes would just be gravy. But I feel not vindicated is not the right word, but completed. I just think that character now has a history that validates his existence.
So it sort of transcends the show.
Yeah, and I'm never one to campaign for things. So once I did that, and I read my book, and I saw it actually in a book form, I went, okay, I can put a check after that, and we'll move on to what it is next.
Well, and certainly for me, I grew up. I spent a big chunk of my childhood in Saudi Arabia, which is where I saw Man from Atlantis. That's where they showed all the movies and the TV show there. So I was.
Oh yeah.
So that was the first time I was exposed to your work was via that show. So I've always had a special fondness for that series.
It's a very strange thing for a show that was, in all reality, not very successful, canceled quite early. I get that reaction from so many people. It is indelibly imprinted in their mind, even if the show didn't run forever and ever. So many people tell me that very same relationship to the show that you just did. Huh. So I feel good about it.
Well, and I mean, when we look at the way, in hindsight, the way everything happens for a reason, I think it's fair to say that had Man from Atlantis gone the distance, you would not have been Bobby Ewing.
Absolutely. I mean, literally 7 days after Man from Atlantis was canceled, it was no longer on the air, but they hadn't made the decision yet, so I was still under contract. But the week that it was canceled officially was the week I signed a contract to start Dallas. So, yeah, if it would have limped along for another 6 months, I would have missed that window of opportunity. And the same thing happened at the end of Dallas to Step by Step.
Wow. So, I mean...
I've had a very fortunate, and I want to emphasize that, it hasn't been a premeditated, well thought out campaign of a career. Mm-hmm. I have just been in the lap of great fortune most of the time.
Well, I mean, and let's talk about Dallas. I mean, you get the script. I'm sure it doesn't even cross your mind the phenomenon, the global phenomenon that it's going to become. So what you mentioned, you like being employed. Was it as simple as that? Well, like here's a job. It sounds good.
Well, in one form, yes. What had happened was one of the benefits of being the single star of a show, even if it's not successful, is it gets industry attention. So when the industry knew their handwriting was on the wall and that Atlantis was not going to be picked up, even though we were still under contract, different ideas were being submitted to my agent. And in the end, we had 5 potential jobs of series pilots that were submitted. One was they were resurrecting Lassie again. Which always to me sounded like, well, at least it's a tried and true subject matter. Maybe that's the one I should take.
Sure.
Another one was Young Pioneers, which did go to a pilot and I think a few episodes. And a couple others, and one was Dallas. And quite literally, my wife and I read them all and just thought, well, God only knows what's going to go. And in essence, it was an eeny, meeny, miny, mo situation, with the one exception that Dallas was being, although they hadn't finalized it yet, when I spoke with Leonard Katzman, he was very sure they were going to do a 5-episode miniseries. So the idea of 1 episode versus 5 sealed the deal. And my wife and I said, okay, let's just do this Dallas show.
Wow.
And we did,
So how soon into the run? I mean, I think it's very interesting because for me, my awareness of Dallas and my sort of having taken it all in is sort of all in the past tense, right? Because the show started about a year before I was born. And, yeah, so I'm sort of putting where I sit in terms of the cultural history of the show, which is just it was always a part of the landscape, and I didn't watch it the whole way through until it came out on DVD. But what strikes me right from the pilot is all the character relationships and everything are set, and it feels like you hit the ground running. And did you have that? Did you feel that camaraderie with the cast right away?
Oh, the cast was instant best friends. I've told this story, and every year that Larry was alive, we told the same story, which was we became instant best friends the day we shook hands at the table reading of the very first script. It
Wow.
was one of those, other than my wife, I don't know that I've had such a strong sense of belonging in the presence of somebody as I did with, I call it Haggy, but with Larry.
Yeah.
And it was mutual. We just clicked as best friends, brothers from another time or something. I don't know.
Wow.
But in defense of everyone else, the whole cast was that way. We had the most fun of a cast for the 13 years the show was on the air. Everybody who guest starred, everybody who was a director on that show, just wanted to become a permanent member of the family. It was just such a great environment to work in. Now, I was not, at the end of the 5th episode, I called my agent. I said, let's keep looking for work. God only knows what's going to happen with this. Larry always said he knew, but Larry lied. So,
Now he was already a big time TV star back then. So were you a little
well,
bit?
everybody thinks he was.
Okay.
He was on I Dream of Jeannie.
Uh-huh.
But I Dream of Jeannie was off the air for over 10 years.
Oh,
He was
okay.
basically an unemployed actor for 10 years after I Dream of Jeannie, before Dallas started.
That's so funny. Never thought about it that
Yeah.
way.
Yeah. But again, that's that perspective of, I Dream of Jeannie is on the air all the time, somewhere in the world, 24/7.
Wow.
And so the concept is that it's always been around. But I think it was 4 years maybe or something like that. I can't quite remember. But then it was gone.
Yeah.
And it was not the period where there were so many channels that reruns happened forever. So, for a while it was disappeared from public. And then it started to come back as more and more channels were added to the television genre, and they were looking for product, and they kept resurrecting old shows, But yeah, he and I actually worked together, but never met on a TV movie prior to Spring Dallas,
Oh, okay.
which we always laugh about. Yeah.
Well, I mean, my question is, as conceived, I mean, it feels like it was, the intent maybe was more to focus on the Pam and Bobby and the sort of the Romeo and Juliet aspect, and if it sort of eventually Larry Hagman became the icon that's most associated with that show.
Absolutely.
Was that just something that the writers started realizing what a sort of magnetic figure JR was, and it started moving in that direction?
Absolutely. I mean, again, if I were in charge of a television show, I'm not sure it would last, a full season. And the show was originally going to be, originally, if you want to know the story, it was going to be Romeo and Juliet, but Romeo was going to die at the end of the first episode.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. Bobby was going to die, and then Pam was going to stay living with the family.
Oh, I see.
And then it would be a Barnes, which is Pamela's family name, versus a Ewing, which is JR's name, and that would be the conflict. And quite literally, Leonard Katzman, excuse me, in one of the network meetings, while they were still, intent on killing off Bobby, before I was ever involved with the show, he was at a big meeting, and he said, "Why does Pam keep living at South Fork?" And they said, "Oh, because, she's this and that." And he goes, No, wait a minute. She just inherited $200 million. Why does she sleep in a bedroom in the camp of the enemy? Why doesn't she go into town? And there was a big silence. And one of the executives said, "Well, maybe Bobby doesn't die." And that was the beginning of my career.
And that's so you owe it to whoever made that decision in that meeting.
Yep. Somebody's voice in the middle of a big meeting who said, "Well, maybe Bobby doesn't die." I actually owe it to Leonard Katzman for posing the question, because he was such a good producer and a character constructor that he knew that there was no way, that it just didn't make any logical sense that she would stay in the ranch and then be abused on a daily basis by JR. But everybody would stay there if Bobby and JR became the focal point, and that's what he wanted to do, and that's what happened. But your original question was absolutely true. Larry's portrayal of that character continually, from the very first episode, continually mesmerize not just the audience, but the producers and the writers. They realized that they could do no wrong writing for that character.
I don't see how you can live with yourself.
Oh, it's not hard. You'll see. Once you give up integrity, the rest is a piece of cake. Hello, Pam. Say, weren't you here a couple of months ago? You're not going to make a habit out of this, are you? You wouldn't recognize oil if it was dripping out of your crankcase.
And you can't stand the fact that Barnes Wentworth is going to be bigger than you ain't ever dreamed of being.
Barnes, you're as dumb as your daddy used to be. No buts, darling. Lucy's going to be just fine. And it seems to me you might spend a little more time planning that party for Jessica than worrying about your bubble-headed niece.
Do you often lurk in doorways listening to conversations?
How else would I know what's going on around here?
And because of him, the best friend I've ever had, that show ran 13 years and then another 3 years. So I owe it all to Mr. Hagee.
It's, last week I saw somebody online said we just elected J.R. Ewing as president. And I said, you're not giving JR enough credit.
Yeah, exactly. That's insulting to JR, actually.
Yeah.
They certainly didn't do that.
I think that's
anyway.
What's most interesting to me about the relationships between the brothers is, and I feel like this is unique in that the respect that they have for their parents is real. JR and Bobby are arguing, but as soon as Jock walks in and, hey, boys, that's enough. Sorry, Daddy. Everybody, and it's real. And I feel like, to me, something as simple as that, like it's not, oh, we want to get one over on Dad or whatever. It's no. This is what Dad says. And even if we're fighting, we respect Mom and Dad. And that feels very rare.
Yeah, it's rare nowadays for sure. That most people can't even relate to that type of personality. At that time period, I mean, literally in the mid 70s, in the Midwest, especially, actually we were a matriarchal family. Mama really actually even controlled Jock, but the respect for the parents trumps everything. And the other thing that was always true is, and Larry and I discussed this, on the rare occasions we talked about our characters, was everything we did in the 13 years that show was on the air was to try and please Mama or Daddy. That was the kernel of, I want to be the best son that they've ever had. And that caused the conflict between the two of us. So it was a brilliant piece of storytelling, in all honesty.
So at what, now you go from essentially having gotten your first starring role relatively recently to being on this phenomenon. You're on magazine covers and you're doing interviews. I mean, what was there whiplash as you dealt with suddenly becoming a global star?
Yeah, I've actually talked about this a lot because it was a very steep learning curve, and I was quite young when it happened, and also the concept of stardom is different now than it was 40 years ago. And I think people are used to the idea of constant recognizability of 1,200 different talk shows and fan magazines and everything. Back then, it was quite rare. It was almost still film movie star kind of thing. And when you were recognized, it was huge. And I'm a very private person, so I didn't take to it the way that I've learned to appreciate it now. It always seemed an intrusion into my life. I loved the work. I loved being a star of a show. But I didn't feel like a star of private life. And when that recognition came within my family environment, it took me a while before I was comfortable with that. And both my boys were very uncomfortable with it. And so it was a quite a steep learning curve, I have to admit. And now, for the past 30 years and more, I've learned to appreciate the fact that, if it weren't for every single person that knows you because of your job, you wouldn't have had the job. So, it's the first time, if 40 people come up to me in the course of the day if I'm out in public, which doesn't happen here where I live now, but it's possible that every time somebody comes up, it's the first time for them, even though it's number 35 for me. And it's much easier now for me to deal with it under those parameters than when I would just inside be saying, oh, God, don't bother me. Leave me alone. I just want to be shopping here or whatever it is. But it's much easier now than it has been for a long time. And it's just it's a period of maturation. It's just growing up.
Yeah.
And I had to grow up. I literally had to grow up.
Well, with that in mind, I mean, so the show was still doing very well when you decided you wanted to leave.
Yes, it was.
And what was did you just feel kind of you'd maxed out as far as what you could do with Bobby?
Well, the nice thing was it was still the best job I'd ever had. It was with the best friends I'd ever had, the best producers, everything was the perfect job. But it was at its absolute height, and it was an ensemble show with Larry, the head of the ensemble. And he and I talked about it a lot. And I said, I really think if I'm going to make a move that will translate into whatever I do next, and none of us thought the show would go 13 years. So we were at the end of our contract. The standard contract is 7 years. And I discussed it with Hagee for a long time, and my wife and everybody else. And I said, I really want to see if I can parlay this position I'm in right now into something new. And so with the discussion, Larry told me every single day, he said, the biggest mistake you'll ever make. And he was right. But I felt I had to do it, and so I did. And I left the show, and it did not parlay into, all of the things I thought I wanted. And I truly did miss the role, the show, and specifically Hagman. But I was the person who chose the way to exit the show, and I asked them to please kill me off so that there's no doubt that Bobby's gone. And
why was that? Why not leave the door open?
Well, because first of all, I just felt it was dishonest.
Okay.
Dishonest from both aspects. It's dishonest in terms of playing on an audience's devotion to the show. I thought it was not even teasing isn't a negative enough word. I really thought it was mistreating the audience's opinion of how they trusted the show and the content. And so that's the way I wanted to leave, because I never thought I was coming back, ever. I didn't want to leave the door open. At least to my credit, I thought I was making the right decision, as opposed to, gee, I don't know if I'm right. I better, make sure I still got my visa.
Burn the bridge on your way out of town.
Yeah. So when I left, and then when, I got a phone call from Larry, and he said, come on out to Malibu and let's get drunk, and I want to talk to you. And when I hung up, I said to my wife, they're going to ask me to come back on the show. And when I went out there, they knew that Larry was the only person that could ask me. So they asked him, and he wanted me back on the show. So that's how the conversation started. And the little bit of trivia is that I was actually on every season of Dallas, because the year I was off the show, I was on the last 10 seconds of the show.
Oh.
So I made it through that season by being on the show. Yeah.
Well, I mean, now this is now obviously the legendary shower scene. Like I said, second only to Janet Leigh. This is audacious. This is audacious by 2016 standards. And I don't.
Yep, definitely.
I mean, I guess I'll just say it. What was the rationale behind writing off a whole season of the show?
Hey, what's the matter? You look like you just saw a ghost.
For a minute, I thought I did.
What are you talking about?
You? Oh, Bobby, it was awful. When I woke up, I thought that you were dead.
What?
I had a nightmare, a terrible nightmare. I dreamed that you were here and you were leaving. And Catherine was in her car and she was waiting. And when we started to leave, she tried to run me down, but you pushed me out of the way. And then she hit you and she crashed into a truck and she was killed. And then we took you to the hospital and you died.
Hey. Pam, I'm right here. And I'm fine.
There was so much more, and Bobby, it seemed so real. There was Sue Ellen, and there was Mark, and I was married.
Hey, you are going to be married to me. Just as soon as we can.
I was so frightened. Oh, I love you so much.
Honey, it's over. None of that happened.
Well, there were several rationales about that. One was, quite interestingly, when I told my wife, I said they're going to ask me back on the show, she instantly said, because she's extremely intelligent and one of the most well-read people I've ever met, she said, well, the only way you could come back on that show is if the previous year was all a dream. And we laughed. And then, later on, once the deal was made, Leonard said to me, he said, well, here's my idea. We're going to just pretend that you never died. Because Leonard left the show the same, Leonard Katzman is who I'm talking about. And Leonard left the show the same time I did. And for pretty much the same reason. He wanted to go out and produce another show and everything. And if you're a real fan and student of Dallas, that year that Leonard was not in control of the scripts was truly a non-Dallas year. They lost their bearings. The plots were crazy, all about international spy rings, and just great. Larry was so unhappy because he wasn't having any fun on the set because we weren't there together as friends. Everything was wrong, and so Leonard wanted to. When they asked Leonard to come back, he wanted to start Dallas exactly where he had left it, and not have to get rid of all of these other characters and tie off all of these plot loose ends and all of the work that was involved. Because he thought, what better thing to do than just not be dead and just start like it's year 8 instead of year 9. And so that's what we did. And not a single cast member, not even Larry, knew how I was coming back on the show. Not one cast member knew, and only a couple of the writers on the show knew. And when we did the shower scene, we did it in a separate studio in a different part of Los Angeles, using a completely different crew. That was a commercial entity that only filmed television commercials, and I did a commercial, quite literally a full commercial for Irish Spring Soap. Just to get the one scene where the door opens and I turn to camera.
So Victoria didn't know either?
No, Victoria had no idea. She did a scene in that episode where she hears the shower running. She gets up, she goes in there, and it's John Beck, the man that she had married on the show the year I was off.
How funny.
And they had a conversation about whatever the subject matter was. And that scene was in the middle of the episode. And she said when she was watching, she thought, oh, I wonder why they cut that scene. And then the show goes on and on and on. And literally, a minute before the end credits, there she is waking up in bed. She thought, that's the strangest thing ever. And when she opened the door and there was Bobby, we never even did the scene together. They just cut it to make it look like she saw me. She screamed. Quite honestly, my phone rang maybe 60 seconds after the end credits, and it was Victoria on the phone. So it was a well-kept secret.
And it's one of the most memorable beats in TV history, probably.
It's up there. The nice thing is I came in second to Who Shot JR, and I think that's only appropriate.
That's good company to have, right? If you're going to come in second.
Yeah, I'd much rather come in second to my best friend.
Well, now, was there a tiny part of you that felt maybe a little bit of pride that they needed you back that much, that they were willing to sort of undo a whole season to get you back in the fold?
Well, yeah, I think pride is better because I don't think I wasn't arrogant about it. The interesting thing was everything that I had hoped for by leaving Dallas happened by my coming back on Dallas. My character and my prominence in terms of my working viability was raised up tenfold.
Because of the hype of that.
Because of that, yeah, because of the hype on the thing and coming back from the dead, and it just and the show's ratings bounced back up. We were dipping in the ratings quite badly. They had actually put on Miami Vice on the same night because they thought, oh, what a great piece of PR if Miami Vice can kill off Dallas as a series. And then here I come back from the dead, and Miami Vice was canceled. So, everything became wonderful. And Larry and I and the cast members and the producers, and we had 5 more unbelievably fun years of working together.
Well, and that in and of itself is, that's what I find so amazing, is that that's the type of maneuver that you can easily see killing a show off.
Mm-hmm.
And
yep.
That didn't happen. 5 more years. That's no joke. That by itself is a respectable run for a show. Is 5
exactly.
years.
And what that is all attributed to is the incredible loyalty of our fan base. And some feelings were hurt that people, felt a bit cheated that they'd invested a year that now was being erased. But their loyalty to the characters and the fact that once they realized that I wasn't coming back on the show as an evil brother or a person who had plastic surgery or any of that kind of stuff, all of which those ideas were floated out there, but that they now had the original Dallas back, they came right back around, and the ratings went right back up. And although I was proud, absolutely, I was also quite appreciative and filled with gratitude that those people stayed with us. And they stayed with us as a family. They didn't, everybody didn't come back on the show because Bobby came back. They came back on the show because Dallas came back.
Yeah, the Dallas that they love.
Yep, absolutely.
And by the way, worth mentioning, you did a reenactment of the shower scene for a Family Guy episode.
Yes, yeah. Well, he was such a fan of the show that when he floated that idea out, and Victoria and I talked about it for about 1 second, I always ran it by my kids because I said, Family Guy, a cartoon? I don't know. What is that? And my boy said, oh, Dad, that's the greatest thing in the world. You have to do that. So we did it, and we had the most fun doing it. It was great. It was just terrific. And that's happened a bit over the years of people wanting to, somehow pin a connection to a part of Dallas. What was it? The Bob Newhart show did that. When they ended their show, they thought, how cool is this? It'll be a dream. And they did it was all a dream. So that's that. You've arrived culturally when people start marrying, certain ideas of your history. So that's kind of cool.
So Dallas ends in 91.
Yes.
And at that point, I think my sense is that everyone was kind of ready to move on.
Oh yeah. Actually, I think probably the worst episode of Dallas we ever did was the last episode with Bill Gray, and it was. And I think it was done because Leonard knew that the show was done. He knew that CBS had finally tired of it. And so we did that whole It's a Wonderful Life episode. The whole time we were doing it, we were looking at each other as cast members going, oh, this is it. Our handwriting's on the wall here. This is not Dallas. This is our swan song. So we were all aware and ready when it was done.
But I mean, you've never parted from Bobby Ewing. You've managed to keep going back to him. You did the 2 movies.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that that's the one thing that both Larry and I and Linda, who's now Larry and Linda and I were the 3 musketeers basically, and Linda and I do so many things together now, and we're just completely filled with gratitude for those characters. So we have no problem resurrecting the recognition factor of me being Bobby or her being Sue Ellen, or doing things like that, because it's a chance in a lifetime.
Well, and I got to say, the way the show transcends, I mean, let me just share this story with you. So a couple years ago, I was working at home, and one thing I would do is I'd just put on Dallas episodes, and I'd be doing stuff around the house. And so my son, he's now 5, but he was 3 at the time, he was with me. He would end up watching it as well, and he would just kind of, through osmosis, absorb it. And so this was a day where my older son, who at the time was 5, happened to be at home also. And the episode is on. It's where JR and Sue Ellen get remarried.
Uh-huh.
So the priest says, "Does anyone have any objections?" And Cliff stands up, and there's like the dramatic music sting, and it goes to credits. And my at the time, the older son, who was 5, he says, "Oh, is that a bad guy?" And my 3-year-old says, "No, that's just Cliff."
Oh my goodness! That's pretty cool.
So
it's just Cliff.
It's just Cliff. My 3-year-old, he's very invested in it. But now I remember reading an interview with you saying that you liked doing the first movie, you were less happy with the second one.
Right. Yep. Well, I rest my case on the statement I made that if I were in charge, it would not be as successful. Leonard Katzman had died. He did the first movie, and we had a great time doing it, and it was a lot of fun. But when we did the second movie, Leonard had died, and we had a contractual obligation for it through the network. And so Larry and I took over the production executive producer duties. And the show, we're not writer-producers. I'm not a character creator in terms of script and plot. And it's just neither of us. It's not what we do, and it's not what we did. And when we tried to do it, we did it badly. And it was just not a good TV movie. And I'm glad we didn't have an obligation for 3, because we would have had to done a third one, and it would have been even more embarrassing. So, it was not. We weren't. Neither of us were happy with that.
So however many years pass after that, and then you hear about the revival. And by the way, in the middle there was discussion of making just a movie, like a brand new recast of roles.
Yeah.
And was that ever something? I mean, did that move beyond the purely speculative, or was that something that was...
Well, it did, but not with us as cast members. There was never a movie idea that involved us as cast, which guaranteed it not being successful, even if it were produced. And for the same reason, the fan base is so loyal to those characters, it would have been an insult to have them played by other people. But the scripts were written at various times. I read one of the Dallas scripts, and again, nobody knew how to do Dallas but Leonard Katzman. The Dallas script for the movie that was going to be John Travolta and Luke Wilson, and all of these people were going to be in it. The script was embarrassingly bad.
Really?
Just awful. What it was the cliche caricature of each of the characters on the show. It was, bad JR, good Bobby, tart Lucy, they just went, drunk Sue Ellen, There was nothing new, nothing attractive, nothing interesting, and it never went. But every few years, it would be resurrected. And after a while, we were sure that it would never happen until Cynthia Sidra wrote the script for the new pilot of Dallas.
So, with the new Dallas, it's first of all, I can't even tell you how bummed I was when it ended. And I mean, I'm sure I speak, for most of the fans. I'm sure I speak for your feelings too. I was heartbroken.
Speak for me. Yeah, me too. Me too.
But I do, one thing that I was, and as I was prepping to talk to you, I was going back and watching some of the episodes, and I watched the funeral episode, JR's masterpiece, and it struck me that if nothing else, what the 2012 series allowed was for we, the audience, to say goodbye to JR.
Yeah.
Because otherwise we wouldn't have had that opportunity.
Well, and that's the strange way the universe worked. When Larry died, as a matter of fact, Larry died tomorrow.
Is that right?
The 23rd of November, Larry died at 4:20 in the afternoon.
Wow.
So tomorrow is the anniversary. But he died while filming. And quite literally, we had several episodes left to do. And a whole season guaranteed for the next season, and he literally died, went into the hospital and never came out. So it was a brilliant piece of construction that Mike Robin and Cynthia Sidra went through to cobble together a plot that lasted several episodes to get us through to the end of the season, to get us to JR's masterpiece, and quite honestly, on purpose, to say goodbye to Larry and the character of JR. And if you go back and look at that episode, JR's masterpiece, for the only time in the history of our show, the actual theme changed on that episode. Everything was to symbolically tip our hats to Hagee and finish off that season with JR's masterpiece. So it was a real hard few weeks and months, but it was, like you said, the ability to say goodbye to that character for every fan that was ever a fan of the show.
Yeah, it's the you have the your speech at the gravesite where you say, now I have to figure out what I'm supposed to do.
Throughout my life, it's pretty much been easy for me to do good. Because I could always count on JR to do bad. A lot of times those bad things were necessary. Maybe more often than I care to admit. I don't want it to be true, but it is. My brother is dead. And so now I have to figure out just what I'm supposed to do in this grand scheme of things.
What a wonderful meta commentary on the interconnectedness of these two characters.
Oh yeah, it's actually Leonard wrote the spirit of Leonard. Cynthia wrote that graveyard scene so appropriately for each of the characters that spoke, and I actually several times tried to convince her not to speak. I thought I really would rather have Bobby not say anything. But they made it, it had to happen, so I ended up doing it. But Linda's speech, the Sue Ellen speech at the graveyard too, was unbelievable. Just crazy.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was all good.
It's like I said, I just watched that last night, so it just felt so incredibly poignant, and I can only imagine what that must have been like for all of you, because you were kind of working through your own emotions, your real life emotions, while going through this.
Well, we were, and leading up to that, every episode, we're pretending that JR's still alive, and so we're going to work every day, having just spoken to JR on the phone, or JR's down. God damn it, why isn't he back here doing this business? And inside you're going, well, because Haggie's dead. That's why, and we have to just keep, soldiering on here until we get to the end. So it was really interesting. I remember when Larry died, and Linda and I were there, with him, and then the next day it's Thanksgiving, and we're down in Dallas, and it's a pretty hollow Thanksgiving feeling, and so I called Linda. She was at her apartment, and my wife and I were at our condo, and my wife was getting ready to go to bed. I said, I'm going to call Linda and see if she needs to come over. So I gave her a jingle, and she came over, and we sat around for maybe 2 or 3 hours and drank a bottle of wine and just, We went through, as friends of Larry and friends of each other, what the characters had to go through for the next however many episodes it took to get to the end of the season. But Linda and I did it on that day. So that made it slightly easier to maintain during the rest of the show. But it was a pistol.
It's, just hearing you describe your friendship, I'm reminded of just how many, people had all kinds of remembrances of him when he passed away. And to the one, it was, what a decent, good man.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that in and of itself is something very refreshing.
Well, Larry, the interesting thing is, Larry, talking about your intro to me being a television icon, there literally was no bigger icon in the world than Larry Hagman at that time. He eclipsed everybody, including Muhammad Ali and everybody. He was a phenomena around the world. Every day he came to work, if you didn't know Larry, you'd think he was a guest star on the show for the afternoon. There was never an instance in the working environment that he was anything other than a member of the ensemble cast of Dallas. No matter what was going on in his life, no matter how big and crazy the world's recognition of him was, he just came to work. Larry and I would, every morning he came to work, we'd have a glass of champagne in his dressing room at about 6:30 in the morning. And we started every day together that way for 13 years. And that was just, it was normal. That's who we were as a family.
Well, and if I may say, whenever you read articles about the nicest people on sets, Patrick Duffy's on that list too. So,
well, thank you. Yeah, it's a nice company to be in, to be compared to Larry. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Well, so for the final season of what ended up being, the end of Dallas as we know it up to this point, did you? What were you worried about the longevity of the show? Was there a sense of can we keep this going without JR?
Actually, no, I wasn't. Let me rephrase that. It was always a matter of, it was an active question, of course. That always has to enter the formula, of course, because he was such an integral part of the show. But even Larry said, and he knew he was dying too, he said, the star of the show is Dallas. That's why we've been successful all this time. He said, the star of the show is Dallas. So, Dallas is just going to keep going as long as people can write an episode of Dallas. And Cynthia could write an episode of Dallas. I think our third year, the year after Larry died, was a really good year on the show. Plot-wise, performance-wise from people, everything held up. Everything continued on. And, you said at the very beginning you were bummed and shocked. You were no more shocked than the entire cast and producers of Dallas. And when TNT, and it wasn't TNT, it was one person at TNT, there was a vacuum when the head of TNT Television, Michael Wright, who was a huge fan of the show, one of the nicest guys in the business, went over to Spielberg's company to head up the television and film arm of Spielberg. There was nobody in charge of TNT for the longest period because they couldn't decide who they wanted to come in and be the new president. So a man in the interim, because the season had to be somehow solidified, or whatever the word might be, he decided that he wanted nothing old on the network. And Dallas was the second highest revenue-producing show on TNT at the time. Second highest. We were making them so much money on TNT. And yet he decided, and you can look it up, I don't name names, but he decided that he was going to make his mark and cancel the show. And quite literally, everybody had already made arrangements to go back to Dallas. I had just made arrangements for this beautiful new condo downtown in the same building Linda was living in. My wife and I were thrilled. We were in the process of furnishing it. Everybody was in the process of making their plans to go back down to Dallas. And I was actually shopping in a supermarket when Cynthia called me and said, I just got a phone call. They're going to announce the cancellation of Dallas in about 15 minutes, and I have to call all the cast members so they're not shocked. And I said, okay, I'll talk to you later. And I just stood there in the aisle of my supermarket going, well, I'll be damned.
Yeah.
Wow, how, why, how, what? And then later on I found out what, the hows and the whys. And it was just a stupid decision, quite honest, stupid decision. I actually feel we might have gone maybe 3 or 4 more years, but we definitely would have gone 2 more seasons. So our ratings were going back up. They had made the adjustment for the JR character. It was all looking good, and I think we could have done it. But that's the business.
It's a shame that ends up being, at least for now, kind of the end of this long-reaching brand.
Yeah, and I don't think it can go, I never say never because look at all the things that have happened. You might get at Dallas, the new generation, trying to find, offspring of characters, like the sons and the daughters of and the inheritors of, and they might try and do it again. They would have to start with a whole new fan base, though, because I don't think the old fans want to see the show without the old actors.
Yeah.
So
I think you're right. I think that if nothing else, I mean, what we can look at is the volume of work, both with the original series and the revival series, and look at that as a complete work in and of itself. And my gosh,
absolutely.
I mean, that's nothing to sneeze at.
No, I mean, that's 16 years of television. I'm not sure it will ever be duplicated again, unless you count The Simpsons or something like that going on forever. But in terms of, cast-written dramas, no, it'll never happen again.
Well, and as we wrap things up, I see that we're running out of time, and I just want to thank you once again for coming on the show. When I first started doing this, and I made my list of people who I'd love to have a conversation with, you were right there at the top. So the fact that at the very end of this year we've been able to make it work is just, my teenage self right now is sort of giving me a high five across time and space.
Well, good for you and your teenage self. I'm glad to have been a part of almost every year of your life. So
It's true.
I appreciate it.
It's very true.
Thank you.
Well, Mr. Duffy, thank you so much for talking with me, and I look forward to whatever you have coming up next.
Okay, well, the new rule now, since we've been on a conversation for 60 minutes, is you can call me Patrick, please.
Okay, well, fair enough. Thank you so much, Patrick.
Okay. Thank
Bye-bye.
you, Jackie. Bye-bye.
And that wraps up another episode of the Nostalgia Theater Show. Again, big thanks to my guest Patrick Duffy for coming and hanging out with us for an hour. If you have any questions or comments, you can hit like on our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/moviefilmpodcast. You can also email us at moviefilmpodcast@gmail.com. Please do hit up iTunes and subscribe to the show. Also leave a review, leave a star rating. Every little bit of feedback helps. If you're digging what we're doing, let people know so that you can spread the word. If you're looking to find me, and my website is zackiscorner.com. That's ZAKIS Corner. You can also find my movie reviews at the Huffington Post, as well as this show, as well as the Movie Film Show. I'm also on Twitter at Zacky's Corner. That's also my Instagram handle. So pretty much wherever you're looking for me, you can find me. That's it for this episode, but we will be back in just a few short weeks. So thank you once again for listening. This has been Nostalgia Theater.